Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and in my most recent book, I do have a pattern that has a fat quarter friendly bag in it. It's a very fun bag to make, and I did do a video on it a long time ago, but I'd like to redo the video using a different size fabric, and I'm going to share some tips and techniques on keeping those seams straight and getting over the thicker seams. So what we need to do for this bag is choose fabric. And I'm going to be using 10-inch pre-cut squares. What I like is to have two fabrics that are opposite, because you're going to see both sides on the outside of that bag. So anything that has some opposite will work great. We do not need to do anything special, just put both right sides together, use a 1/4 inch, stitch all the way around, and leave a little opening right here because all of this will need to be turned right side out. This bag will have some top stitching on it, so you will see the thread that you're going to use. So if we're going to use a dark thread, you're going to see the dark on the white, and the opposite, if you're using a light thread, you're going to see it right here on that dark fabric. So choose a thread that you think will look best on both. And in my case, I'm going to be using an all-purpose red thread. And I think that red will show up perfect on both sides. So I've stitched all the way around using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I do have that opening. The first tip I'd like to share with you is a little pressing that's going to help this turn over. And we're going to need to press it. Pretend that stitching is already there and press the seam in one direction and press the seam in the other direction. And you need to do it just to where that opening is. So that is where that stitching line would normally be. When we turn that right side out, it's already going to line up for us, and it's already pre-pressed for us. From there, we need to trim off these little points. We do not want a lot of bulk in these corners, so we're going to snip those off. So snip close to that point and try to avoid those threads. So when that is turned right side out, you can see where that's going to match up and it's going to give us less bulk. So we need to do that to all 4 corners. Now turn this right side out. I will use a tool to poke out those corners. And you can see already where that seam wants to lie flat. Before we get to the iron, take whatever tool you're using to poke out those corners and run it along that seam. So you're sort of pre-pressing it. This is definitely an extra step, but it saves us time at the iron and it makes it look really professional. So I haven't even pressed it and it already looks nice and pressed. And there's that little opening. And you can see where that's going to already match up. Now I can take this to the iron and press. I don't have to try to pull out those seams. They're already pushed out for me. Once this is pressed, we're going to stitch all the way around that bag. We're going to get nice and close to that edge. That's going to seal up that little hole and it's going to give it a nice look. So let's go to my Bernina and I'm going to share with you a tip on how to sew a very small seam and not have that needle come over the edge. So what we're wanting to do is stitch right along this edge all the way around. But it's very easy to stitch off. You can get a foot that will ride right along the edge so you don't fall off. But if you don't have one of these feet with that little bar in it, you can make a bar right here on your machine. I have 4 layers of fabric. I have the 2 seams inside and the front and back. So I've taken the same weight fabric and have folded it so that I have 4 layers of fabric right along that smooth edge. I'm going to decide where I'm going to have my stitching, and then I'm going to place this fabric underneath so that it builds a wall. Once I've decided where that wall is going to be, I can tape this down. And I just use painter's tape. I'm going to tape that down, keeping it as straight as I can. So what I've done is I've built a wall that this fabric is going to be able to slide on. It's also covering one of the feed dogs, so this foot is now sitting straight. When you're stitching on one edge of fabric and you don't have something on this side, the foot is on a bit of an angle, and that makes the stitching want to come off. So by building this little wall, we now have the same thickness. So that foot's going to go straight, so the stitching is going to go straight. If you find that the feed dogs are trying to pull this fabric, you might just need to put a little bit of a pin on that tape just to hold it. Now you can see where that wall is holding everything together. I hold the wall and I hold the fabric and stitch all the way around. When I get to the corner, I'm going to turn and do one stitch on that corner, turn again, and finish stitching. So I have that nice little border that goes all the way around. We now need to take this square and divide it into 3. And we're going to divide it in 3 along this way. I find the easiest way to divide this into third is to start and draw a center line. And that way we can take our measurement going from the outside. And in my case, I need 4.5 inches for each piece. So I start with that center line, and I know I'm going to need 2 1/4 inch. So I put a pin on that one side, 2 1/4 inch, and I put a pin on the other side. So I now have 3 semi-equal measurements, and if it's not exact, that's fine. Now we're going to take that and we're going to fold it right where those pins are. So we're folding the one side and the other side. So this is going to be the outside of the bag. So if you prefer it to look this way, then just fold them in. Whatever way you want will be fine. I'm going to choose the darker red for the outside. What we're looking for is we don't want that tip over, we want it in a little bit. So if you need to just adjust it a little bit, that's fine. And same with this point. We don't want it over that line, so when it's folded, we don't want that fold. So you can see where that point is coming right there where that seam is going to be. And press. Before we do any more sewing, we're going to do one more pressing. So we can take those pins out and take this point and fold it in. And we want to leave just a little bit peeking through. I'm going to do that to that side and press for that side. So we now have this sort of little envelope looking thing. So just a quick recap, we have folded in, over, and back over that way. And it doesn't matter if you go left or right. We need to do a few rows of stitching. One row stitching, we need to go right down the center. So I did do a chalk line. Then we're going to do 2 rows of stitching right along this edge. So my first row is going down the center. And for the top, I'm going to start with a 1/4 inch. And I'm starting right off of that edge, and I'm going to stitch all the way coming right off. So I've come right off. The next row, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch from this side. Or if you don't want to measure, you can use this 5/8 mark and do a 5/8 seam. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start off, stitch all the way, and come off again. following that 5/8. So I have that 1/4 inch, and then this is the 5/8. What we're looking for is just a little area here where we're going to put some ribbon. We now get to take this bag, fold it in half. So we're folding it so that the right sides or the outside will be touching. We want to sew a scant seam right along that edge. And that is where you can use this foot, or in this case, we're going to have to thicken up that fabric along the edge. I'll show you how this foot is going to work, the same as this fabric. So I've moved my needle over a little bit, so it's going to be stitching right along this edge. But I do have a big thick seam to get over here. So I'm going to use some fabric to help me get over. So this is the same measurement, and I'm going to be able to stitch on that. So I'm going to stitch, and I'm going to come off of this fabric by maybe 1 or 2 stitches. I do want that fabric there, and I'm going to make sure this is all lined up, slide it in, so it's going to touch the needle, but this thick piece of fabric is going to keep that foot straight and not on an angle. So I can start stitching, back stitch, making sure I'm not stitching on that extra fabric, and stitch. And you can see where that fabric is going to follow this wall. Come to the end, back stitch, and then I'm going to stitch right back onto that fabric. And you can see how perfectly straight that line is. I didn't get hung up here getting over that thick fabric. Now I'm going to be able to do that next seam. Once again, I'm just going to stitch off of this fabric a couple of stitches. Line up my second edge, slide this in until that fabric touches the needle. Take a couple of stitches, reverse a couple of stitches, and you're not going to stitch on this because you've already stitched off of it, and continue down. And back stitch. So I have another nice small row of stitching done. And if you want, you can stitch right back onto that fabric. The stitching of this bag can be complete just the way it is, unless you want to put some boxed corners in. Make sure that the pockets are going in the right way, and we're folding that seam in half so it matches that stitching line. Peek and make sure your pockets are going in the right way, and now just stitch a little bit right here. And for that, I'm going to change the foot. Move my needle back to the center point. I'm going to stitch back on this and stitch just a little bit here. And I'm just going to use the edge of the foot as a guide. Turn your fabric a bit on an angle, and then you can take this piece and just slide it right up. Back stitch a little bit. And back stitch off that corner. So we have that little corner stitched down. So I'm going to do it to the other side. Make sure the pockets are on the right side. Line up the stitching line on both sides. I'm going to stitch off of this thick piece of fabric, put it on an angle, and that's going to match that angle. So those two fabrics are together. Do a couple of rows of stitching. This is now off. Back stitch and continue stitching. all the sewing is now complete. And I can trim this off and turn the bag right side out. We now have those little corners taken care of. Let's go and put some string or some ribbon around the top. You will need 2 pieces of ribbon or cording at 12 inches. One piece is going to go around this way. The other piece is going to go around and it's going to come out the other side. There are many different ways we can thread that in. We can use the old-fashioned safety pin, but I like to use a flexible bodkin. So I have a ball on one end, and this I'm going to be able to just loop, tighten that, and now put it through. So I'm going to start on one side. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to bypass that second side, go right in, and I'm using that row of casing that's in between. And that flexible bodkin will just follow all the way around. Now I can take that off. So I have that one piece that went all the way around, bypassing that hole. And I'm going to knot that while it's here. And I get to put the second one in. This time I'm going to start with this side, go all the way around, bypass that hole, go all the way, coming back out that next side. I now have those 2 ends that I can just pull, and it clinches that bag closed. And it's easy to open up, and with that little bit of a flat bottom, it does have a nice look to it. We have that outside pocket on both sides. It closes up, and it was all started with 2 10-inch squares. This is approximately a 4 by 4 inch bag. So it's nice for a couple of sewing supplies, a little piece of jewelry, or something special just in time for Mother's Day. The directions are in my book for a larger bag, and it has some great tips along the way. It's a cute little bag. It's quick to make, especially if you use the 10-inch pre-cuts. What a nice way to give someone a little present. I'll put some links in the description, and as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter, all under Sew Very Easy. Thanks for joining me today. Bye for now.